Okay, so today we're going to start off with the War of 1812. The objective for today is that students will be able to assess the political and economic changes that occurred during this period, with emphasis on James Madison and the War of 1812. So I want to make sure you get this objective down on your daily check sheet, so make sure you put that in your own words. James Madison. James Madison was our fourth president. And he was president from 1809 to 1817. And a couple of things that you need to know about James Madison is that he was from Virginia, from the VA, and that his political party was what was known as the Democratic Republicans. And James Madison was the president that was during the War of 1812. So some of the causes of the War of 1812. So there were some problems happening between Great Britain and France that indirectly impacted us, which led us into the War of 1812. Great Britain wanted to prevent France from trading. So Great Britain set up a blockade, and this blockade is when ships are prevented from entering any seaports so that the ships can't get into trade. And they wanted to prevent France from trading, so they set up a blockade that prevented American ships from trading with Great Britain, or from trading with France. So this angered a lot of Americans and a lot of people. Angered Americans. We were not happy about the fact that we couldn't trade freely with France. In addition to that, they also practiced impressment. Impressment is when Great Britain captured Americans at sea and drafted them into the British Navy. And you can see a picture of that right down here, where the Americans are being forced onto British ships, and they forced them into the British Navy, even though they weren't part of the British Navy. So again, this angered people, angered Americans. So now we have a hostile relationship with Great Britain because of these two events, which led us into the War of 1812. There was one more event that led us into the War of 1812, and this happened because of the desire for westward expansion. As Americans pushed further westward, we ran into conflicts with the natives that were already living there, one being Tecumseh. Tecumseh wanted to stop expansion, and he knew that he could do this if he united the American Indians. So he tried to unite American Indians, and in the process of doing this, now despite his attempt to unite the American Indians, that still led into a battle between Tecumseh's group and soldiers from Indiana in what we call the Battle of Tippecanoe. In the Battle of Tippecanoe, the Tecumseh's Confederacy had received weapons from Great Britain. So it was a very deathly war. Now, the soldiers did end up defeating the natives. However, the natives, or the American Indians, were able to kill many soldiers because of these weapons. And so this was what we call the final motivation for war. The war hawks wanted to declare war on Great Britain after this event because they said this was the final straw of Great Britain. Moving on to the Hartford Convention. The Hartford Convention, not everybody agreed with going to war. The Federalists were not in support of the War of 1812, and so they met to discuss what we call succession. Succession is the wanting to leave the United States. And you're going to hear us talk a lot about succession between now and the Civil War. It happened a couple of different times. But the Federalists wanted to leave the United States. They didn't want to be a part of this war. And so after the war, Federalists were viewed as treasonous, meaning they were viewed as against the U.S., which then led to the eventual end of the Federalist Party. African Americans helped fight during the War of 1812, but they actually helped to fight with the British. Many of them escaped out of slavery. To help the British because it was a way for them to get freedom, or they were hoping that it would get freedom. And right here you can see during the War of 1812, thousands of enslaved African Americans gained freedom by fighting for the British or serving as guides during the British raids on coastal communities. Many were given the choice of enlisting in the armed services or settling in various locations throughout the British Empire. East of here in the Tanger Island at the British base of Fort Albion, the British trained African Americans to serve in the Colonial Marines. From Fort Albion, the Colonial Marines, along with British troops, engaged in the Virginia militia and numerous landings along the northern neck of the eastern shore throughout the summer of 1814. And finally, the economic impact of the War of 1812. The War of 1812 led us into what we know is one of the industrial revolutions. It allowed for improvement in transportation in both canals and railroads. One of the most famous canals was the Erie Canal. It was a way to transport goods from the East Coast into the inner parts of the country. We also saw huge agriculture improvements, including what we know as the cotton gin, as well as the mechanical reaper. And that's what you see here on the right-hand side. It was a way to harvest grain from the field without having to do it manually. Textile mills allowed for a large growth in industry. And we had communication improvements as the telegraph. Many of these improvements happened because of the tariffs from the American system. So a tariff is a tax. So this encouraged the production of American goods. And that's it for the notes for today.